never.
So your parents never had a telephone?
No, never had a telephone. There was always electricity at Bondi because I was brought up at Bondi, and there was always gas and electricity on in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So that was from 1923. They were there in 1923,
Mm-hmm.
and so that answers that and that.
Yep. And what about cars? So when did your family get their first car?
My family never got a car.
Okay.
We got our first car round about 19. When we came up here first, we'd been up here about 12 months, living in here, and we went harbours with a neighbour 2 doors away,
Mm-hmm.
on a little an old Chrysler. A real bomb it was. It was a good car to start off with, but it was a manual, of course.
Mm.
And so that was, what year did we come up here? 1948? Would it be 1948?
I think that's from what you were saying the other
Probably
week. Yeah.
about 1950s, I think.
Mhm.
That was Dick and me. Yeah, that's right. Say 1950.
So what was that like? Your first ever car? Was that exciting? Was it?
Oh, we thought it was wonderful. The two families, Joe Musgrave was the only driver. And Dad couldn't drive at that time, but because we were all so poor, I forget what it cost. It cost about $100 or so. It was something, it was an old car, and the two families, that was us with our 2 boys and them with their 2 girls, went up to Forster, and we rented a house up there in Forster, and came back. We did that trip. I don't know how far Forster is these days, but anyway, we did that. We had a good little holiday, and we've got photos of it at the beach, at some beach, and came back. And after that, Dad decided that he would. When I was having your mother, Dad decided that we should have a car of our own. It wasn't good enough to share a car because Dad wanted to take me to hospital. He didn't want to be knocking up the Musgroves in the middle of the night and say, "Where's the car keys?" And so it was when your mother was just about due to be born that we got a car of our own, and that was a Chev. A big Chevy. It was a lovely car, and that was a manual. He learned on a manual, and then so that was just think of when your mother was born, and that we had our car by that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just there's really only 2 more because you've kind of answered those other ones. So when did you get your first television, and what was that like?
We've been up here 12 months, I think, when we were the first ones in the street to get television. So that would have been, when did we come up here? 1948. 1948. So when did television was reasonably new, and I suppose early 1950s, I suppose.
That must have been pretty. You must have felt pretty good being the first one in this neighbourhood to.
Oh, it was, and everybody wanted to come, and we just had to get people in clumps. You'd get the next door neighbour in first of all, until gradually everybody got their own. Of course, it didn't. After a while, they started to save up for one. And they're nothing like what we've got today. They were those little freestanding things, and we thought it was marvellous. And you think of the programs that we used to watch avidly, and some Brill cream or something. Or one of the stations, I forget how many. There was only a couple of stations, I think. I forget how the stations went, but one the picture faded out with some little. Every night it was the same little ditty that was playing, and the picture would slowly fade out, and you'd switch it off. It wasn't round the clock.
Right.
It was on within certain hours, obviously.
Oh, right. So if you turned on the television outside those hours, there'd just be nothing on at all. Like it just.
No, well that's right. I think it came on at a certain time, but that's a hazy recollection. But I know it. Whether that was just that station that phased out before you went to bed, you know, it might be midnight, but it definitely was no more on that station. Whether all the stations went off the air, I don't know. Whether things like the National, I wouldn't even know what the stations were called, what numbers they were or anything. Anyway, it's yeah.
Okay, and just the last one. This is from Craig. So Beck's husband.
Yes.
So it's kind of a long one, but I'll just read it. So, did you have any ideas about what the world would be like when you got older? For example, did you expect aeroplanes to be invented, or did you ever think that you'd be able to travel to the other side of the world in a single day on big jets and stuff like that? Did you? What was your vision of the future?
Well, as a child, you mean as a child, growing up?
I suspect that's what he didn't specify. So I'm guessing that he meant when you were a young person, so maybe in your teens, I guess. What was your vision of the future? Did you ever expect technology to emerge?
No, those sort of things would never. Harry and I were so delighted as little kids. If an aeroplane, I mean one with propellers and wings, there's like
a little Cessna or
exactly.
Little one.
If one went overhead, we would be that would make our day. It would be 7. We'd call to one another. There's an aeroplane in the sky, and you'd run outside and you'd wave and you'd shout out, "Hello," and and so on, and. As for thinking, well, back there, your mind couldn't be expanded that far to even think of what we're looking at today. That would be absolutely, you'd think, oh, that couldn't happen. You'd be dismissing that. So there's been great, mind you, early when we were quite young, Kingsford Smith was doing wonderful things. I don't remember Amy Johnson, but I do remember that American woman flyer that was lost and they never found her. Earhart? Amelia Earhart, does that ring a bell?
The name does ring a bell. But
I think it's Amelia Earhart, just from memory. And she was American, and I don't know what she was supposed to be doing, but to go around the world, or whatever trip she was taking, I think it was over terrible terrain, and I don't know if they ever found the plane, but she just went. It just went, and there was no communication. But Kingsford Smith, of course, we were full of stories about him. We thought that he must have been wonderful, and of course the airport was Kingsford. Is it still called Kingsford Smith?
It is. Yeah.
Okay, and so. But as for what happens today and going to the other ends of the earth in just hours is absolutely mind. You would never have, your mind wouldn't have been stretched that far to even think about it. But I always thought how scary it would be to go up in a plane. You think they seem to be so far up, and so on and so forth.
Well, I guess to get to the other side of the world, in those times it would be a boat, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Weeks.
Well, when my grandmother went back to England for the coronation of George and Elizabeth, it was 6 weeks. It takes 6 weeks on a liner to get there. Now, when you think of 6 weeks, coming around the Cape of Good Hope, in terrible weather, they were all seasick. Most of them were seasick as dogs. They just didn't rise for, they couldn't. They were stuck in bed, and there they had their misery.
Yeah.
seasickness is a dreadful thing. And so as for thinking about that, that would be, you couldn't even conceive that would happen. That would never have crossed my mind that would happen. I just felt that I hoped that one day I would go to England, but and I was thinking 6 weeks on the water, and to me that sounded rather lovely. But in my ignorance, but you never think of what it would be like to fly and just and jets and all of that, and the growth of that it would be like so futuristic that you'd think, oh, that somebody's pulling my leg.
Right.
You couldn't take it on board. You could not take it on board. Yeah, so it's just marvellous.
Okay. Well, Grandma, that's pretty much all the questions that everyone had. I don't think I've... Oh, there was... Sorry, I just found one more from Uncle Richard. It's not really a question, and I guess this is just more for the record. He just wants to know how far back you can trace the family line.
Well, we've never gone into looking up the archives and getting the family tree together. We've never done that. But I can only remember what Granny told me about her grandmother. So that would be. I'm wondering where those old photographs of my ancestors went. They were probably pictures on the wall which were destroyed by the fellow that bought my mother's house, and which is rather a shame. Today I would be tracing. I'd be eager to know. Like if I was well enough and young enough, I would love to have tracked the family line back, but. So
do you know any details like what your grandmother's grandparents' names were or where they lived, or do you know any of that detail or not really?
Well, my grandmother's grandmother or great-grandmother was a Spaniard, and she obviously married an Englishman, and because all all of her siblings, the women, were they looked like Spaniards. They were biggish women. Not that my grandmother wasn't big; she was quite slight of stature, but they were big, buxom women with high cheekbones. That's something that's come through. My mother had high cheekbones. I've got high cheekbones, and they were all dark hair, and there were some beautiful photos that Gran had that have since been destroyed. Someone has destroyed them, of her family. Remember, she was one of 16, and including men. Walter and Edgar were two of them. That's the only ones I can remember her talking about. But she was the eldest girl, but she had all of these. There were girls and boys, a big family, but I can remember my great-grandfather too. I can just remember him as a white-haired old man, and as I said to you last time, I have that little tiny photograph of him and me in a backyard playing with a dog. And so I can't go back any further than that. And when we went to England, we tried to, we didn't have anything to go by to look up any, that we knew there would be rells somewhere, but we couldn't contact any. We didn't have the time anyway. And so that's, but when it came to the Joneses side, I could have got a lot of information out of Poppy Jones, Dick's father, if I'd thought about it, but those days have gone anyway, and Pop had a very good memory. He would have told me if I'd asked him, but I never thought about that. So that's rather a fizzer for whoever asked that question, because it sort of stops there.
That's all right.
Yeah.
That's all we can ask for is what you remember.
Well, that's right. I wish it was otherwise.
Yeah.
I'd love to know more about those that went before, apart from the fact that my great-grandfather was a very fiery nature.
Yeah.
And that the family turned to Protestantism because of him being flogged when he went to school by one of the brothers. So that's all. That's what has affected our family more than anything else.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd all be Roman Catholics.
Right. And sorry, there's just a couple more that I found down the bottom here from Mum.
Yep.
Are you okay? Just there's 2 or 3 more.
Sure.
Did you want to go to the bathroom first, or we can just fly through them now?
Look, I'll go to the toilet.
All right.
I think it might be very fortuitous
Yep.
because I have been in this chair so